to speak about this evening is the actual creation of creativity. A lot of people have the misunderstanding that creativity is a gift, that it's something given to you by God or that you're born with. It's not true. It's one of the more, I think, destructive beliefs that we have in our culture. Creativity is actually a skill. And there's a lot of study going into it now. Universities have set up whole departments to study the process of creativity. And a lot of work has been done on that. I'm going to share some of that with you this evening, so that in my full-length version of this, I have everybody in the audience has pretty much planned out their next manual by the time we're done. And I'll show you how easy it is, actually, to get ideas when you're sitting there staring at the blank page or the blank computer screen wondering what you're going to talk about. Now, we all know Adobe, right? The Adobe Reader. They did a global study in which they asked people about a lot of questions. Here's what they found out, is that 8 in 10 people feel that unlocking creativity is critical to economic growth. Economic growth. Only 1 in 4 people believe that they are living up to their own creative potential. So everybody thinks it's terribly important. Very few people think they're actually doing it. In the workplace, 75% of respondents said they're under growing pressure to be productive rather than creative, as if there's a difference. Real productivity is creative. One of the most pervasive myths of creativity is that only a few people are really creative. All right, so do you all recognize that? Have you all worked in places like this? Being creative isn't just about fulfilling your life. It creeps into every part of our lives, into our relationships, into our work, into everything that we do. In fact, how many of you think you're not creative? Good. Because if you've ever been on the freeway and hit a traffic jam and you came up with an alternate route, you just got creative. So, now, Michael Curtin. Michael Curtin is one of the leaders in the field. And here's what he came up with, that there's basically 2 types of people, assuming that we're all creative. First of all, there's innovators. We know who they are. They're the people who get all the attention. They are focused on novelty. They approach from unexpected angles. They challenge assumptions, irreverent towards consensual views, which is why they're usually very unpopular. And one of the reasons why very often they have trouble getting their ideas accepted. They're paradigm breaking. They believe in radical change. They are revolutionary. And for the most part, they are unappreciated. And for the most part, they fail over and over and over again until they don't. Those are our innovators. Now, what I contend most people are, and certainly what I am, is an adapter. Adapters, they're focused on detail. They're precise. They're reliable. They're predictable. Find new ways to improve traditional ways of working. They are evolutionary. They don't necessarily think outside the box. They build a better box. And if you don't think that's important, let me ask you, would you rather fly across the Atlantic Ocean in a World War I biplane or a Boeing 787? Hey, they're the same thing, aren't they? But it's been adapted a few times. Right? Okay, and now I'll give you an example in the creative world of how this works also. Paul McCartney woke up one morning and he had this tune in his head, complete. I mean, he had the whole song there. In fact, it came so easy to him that he thought for sure he must have heard it somewhere. This couldn't have just come from nowhere. So for a couple of weeks, he went around and played it for people and said, have you heard this? Have you heard this? He was so worried about it. Everybody said no, so he finally figured, okay, it's mine. So the way he and John Lennon used to work when they created songs was they would come up with the melody first, which he now had. And then they'd worry about the words later, but as a placeholder, they would put lyrics in and then adapt them as they went along. So here's the first version of a song you may recognize. Scrambled eggs, oh my baby, how I love your eggs, not as much as I love scrambled eggs. Let's go get more scrambled eggs. That's the first version, literally. And then they worked on it and came up with something a little bit better. But that's a perfect example of adaptation. And that's how they work. Now, once we understand which one of these that we are we an innovator or are we an adapter? It's important to know which, right? Once we know that, we can move our creative thinking from the random, from the accident, from the inspirational, to the deliberate. One phrase that I heard, it may be a little bit harsh, but it has some truth to it. Inspiration is for amateurs. Is for amateurs. Right. Because that only comes every once in a while. Real pros, real creative people have figured out the deliberate. They can make it happen at will. So here's one method that is used very, very, very frequently, and you've probably used these methods without even knowing it upon occasion. There's divergent and convergent thinking. Now, divergent thinking, it's finding different approaches. It's opening up your mind. It's letting anything go. You may have had a, what do they call it, a mastermind group where everybody just contributes ideas to the whole thing. And you do that by deferring judgment. Suspend evaluation. Don't evaluate every idea that comes into your head. Just put it out there. Those of you who have seen me do some of my things in the past, there's a theater game that I use, which is called Yes and Yes But. We're always using the yes but in our thinking, and we stop ourselves dead because we're evaluating. Hey, there's enough people to stop you out there. You don't have to do it yourself. Okay? Seriously. So you suspend evaluation for yourself and for whoever else is working with you. That's really hard to do, particularly in the corporate world. And I worked in the corporate world for 29 years, and let me tell you, creativity can be a real casualty. Now, go for quantity. Having more choices is more powerful than having a few. So just go for quantity. We're not worried about quality at this point. Make connections. If somebody comes up with an idea, what idea does that spark in your brain? And make that connection. And seek novelty. Think different. If you find yourself in an organization that is constantly stymied by the idea, well, this is the way we've always done it. I can't think of a better reason to do it differently. All right, so here's something I want you to think about. Here's a man holding a block of wood. If he lets go of it, what will happen? It will fall down. You sure? Pretty sure. All right. The answer is, it depends on where he is. If he is on land, standing, yes, you're right. It will drop. However, if he's underwater, it will rise. Correct?
Yes,
And if he's in outer space, it'll just stay put.
that's true.
So this is just an idea on how you can break the chains on your thinking. And this actually, I found this through the University of Udine in Italy, and that's their engineering department. This is a test that they give their engineering students,
Wow.
which I think is a great idea to open up their brains a bit. All right, now that's divergent thinking. Let's look at the other side now, step 2, which is convergent thinking. Evaluate the ideas found in divergent thinking. This is where we start now narrowing it down. But very important here, we want to avoid critical thinking. We are wired to come up with what's wrong with something. What we need to rewire ourselves for is what's right with it. That's what we want to know. That's what we want to find out. Because if we have a mastermind group that came up with a whole bunch of ideas, and we can find a whole bunch of things that are right, we might hit on a great solution. If we keep thinking about what's wrong with it, we're going nowhere. Now, creativity, this is from Scott Adams of Dilbert fame. Creativity is allowing yourself to make mistakes. Art is knowing which ones to keep. And so often, isn't it true? Great creativity has occurred by accident. But they were smart enough to realize, wait a minute, this is good. Like the famous story about Post-it notes, right? At 3M. That was a mistake. Turned out to be a very lucrative penicillin. Well, it was a mistake. Turned out to be a life-saving mistake. I don't know how many millions of people have been saved by saving penicillin. Now, in a conventional meeting, in the corporate world, or any kind of business world, or even within a Toastmasters club, here's what generally happens. An idea is suggested, we evaluate that idea, and then we either reject it or accept it. That's the straight line. This is pretty straightforward. What I'm talking about now is doing it a little bit differently, doing a brainstorming meeting. And there's just a little simple adjustment that we make here. It's nothing radical, which is suggest ideas, not an idea. That you get that all done first. Then you record the ideas. Very often, if you've been to a brainstorming meeting, they're writing it up on a board or something like that. You stop when you have enough ideas. What is enough?
Oh, you have to put it on the paper.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's up to you, right? Or maybe people just run out of ideas. But stop when you have enough. And then now we converge. We go and we evaluate all those ideas. We don't talk about what's wrong with them. We talk about what's right with them. And at the end, we can converge a better idea out of all of those. Now, I'm going to give you an example of how this works successfully. This happened at Pacific Power and Light many, many years ago. They had a problem. Ice forms on power lines during the spring and during the fall, right? This is up in the Seattle area. Linemen have to climb the poles and break the ice up. This is labor intensive and extremely dangerous. They want to stop doing this. So they decided to have a meeting. And they brought in wisely, not just linemen. They brought in people from every level, from all to secretaries to accountants to they brought in a whole mix of the company to try to solve this problem. Well, they worked at it for a while and then they had a break. And during the break, the person who was running the meeting heard one of the attendees telling a story in the break room, a rather amusing story about when he was climbing up a pole and a bear started coming up right behind him. And he thought, well, that's funny. That's great. When we come back after the break, I'll have him tell that story, and it'll lighten the mood of it. So he did. And the story was told. Suddenly, people began thinking, oh, wait a minute. I'll tell you what, why don't we teach bears to go up there and break up the ice? And then they thought, well, we have to give them an incentive, right? So why don't we put a honey pot on top of the poles? And then the bears will climb the poles. Now, they're all laughing. They're all, being rather silly, right? But when it got to, well, how do we get the honey pot on top of the pole? They said, well, we've got helicopters. They can go down the line and put honey pots on top of the poles. Because, again, we don't want our linemen climbing the poles anymore. And that's when it hit. One of the secretaries in the room had worked in a MASH unit in Vietnam. And she remembered those helicopters coming in, and thump, 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 and the downdraft that was created by those helicopter blades. And she said, wait a minute, have you thought of just hover the helicopter over the area and let it break the ice apart? Guess what they ended up doing for the next decade until they came up with a better solution? They used the helicopters to break the ice off of the lines. Now, all this came out of joking around, but people having an accepting attitude, making the connections, building the story one after the other, and they came up with an incredibly creative idea. So, creativity. Most workplaces are not like this. They are not a sandbox. They're not like what we have here in Toastmasters, where we get to come in, fail, and learn. In fact, sometimes when we fail, that's the best use of our time, because that's how we learn. And I do call Toastmasters the great sandbox for that reason. Now, you heard in my intro that I do a lot of speaking across the country. I do. But I still belong to 4 Toastmasters clubs because I take everything I do into those clubs. In fact, I will take one speech and I'll take it to every single one of those clubs because I know that by the 4th one, after I've gotten the feedback, I may get it right. And knowing that gives me an incredible amount of freedom to try anything I want. Really stick my neck out, because I know that I will learn something from it. And I want to encourage you to do the exact same with Toastmasters and let that seep out into the rest of your life. If you are in a workplace where you are in a leadership role, you can take this to your workplace and create a much better workplace. So Toastmasters gives us the perfect model for this. It really does. It's the right environment. We have support. We get the feedback that we need, positive, constructive feedback, so you don't have to be afraid to hear it. We have the discipline of the regular meetings with the timer always there, keeping us in check. And we have the opportunities to lead. If you haven't thought about Toastmasters in this way, how it can foster an environment of creativity and help you develop the skills of creativity, I urge you to start thinking that way now, because that's the most valuable thing you will get out of this. How many of you plan to run for office?
That's next week.
All right, so you don't need to do the most inspirational speech the world has ever seen. You can come in here and plan to fail. Just go ahead, go for it. And because we do have the ultimate
sandbox here.
Creativity is not a gift. Creativity is a skill to be developed. So go forth, ladies and gentlemen.